Okay, a bit excited. I'm gonna try and act really cool. Hi, welcome to Redesigning Systems with Event Storming. My name, oh, wait, it's important. My name is Sharir. I am the Guild Master, the backend Guild Master at Premium. And a lot of what I've been doing in the last 6 months was trying to help different teams in Premium basically try to prepare to redesign everything. And what kept repeating with all of them was that the design phase was really long, it was challenging, there was a lot of unknowns, and even after we invested so much time into the design, we still made some wrong decision that end up costing us more time later on. And I don't think Premium is special. I think there's many teams and groups at Wix that are facing the same thing right now, and maybe even some people here in the crowd. And that's why today I want to talk to you about a method called event storming and how that will help you discover your domain modeling earlier and thus reducing those costly surprises down the line. But obviously, I can't really talk about redesign without talking about the big buffalo in the room, which is the big Nile migration that we're all dealing with. And just to kind of align, for those that don't know what Nile is a set of tools created to streamline our backend dev velocity and to allow us to generate microservices in a matter of days. But Nile is not just a set of tools. It is a very opinionated set of tools. And it's inspired a lot from domain-driven design, or DDD, which is an approach that focuses on modeling a system around the business domain it serves. And you can see that inspiration as Nile pushes us to create small microservices with a single domain entity. So at the beginning of this year, we were all asked to migrate all of Wix to Nile. But one does not simply migrate to Nile. It's not just moving code from one artifact to another. It looks less like this and more like this, because basically we were all asked to redesign all of Wix using Nile, or in my case, to try and redesign all of Premium and its big, complex domain and architecture, and to plan it. So this domain that I'm talking about is with 90 different artifacts. It's with 2 huge, very old monoliths, a lot of DB joins, and Premium is old. So we've seen the full evolution of Wix. We have wires, JSPs, Hibernate, Bootstrap, a few tagless services here and there. So I think you're trying to get the feel of the complexity that we were facing. And if I go back in time to what I was feeling in those days, it really wasn't clear to me how do you navigate this. How am I supposed to kind of design with all these unknowns? I've been to Premium for 6 years, but still, I don't know everything. Where do you start from? It's a really big ecosystem. Which part am I supposed to start from? What's the right scoping? Like they say, don't take a too small scope, but don't take a too big scope. Basically, I needed something, a map, kind of to navigate this. How can I make those big technical decisions without the confidence? I need to know where I'm going. I need to know where this all ends up at. And that's why we needed a Northstar. And when I say a Northstar, what I mean is where we want to be at the end of this big redesign. Our ideal domain modeling, which in the age that Nile basically is a single entity per service, the ideal domain modeling is our high-level architecture. But how do you find a North Star? I had no idea. And I started asking around people at Wix that have a lot more experience than me, asking their guidance, give me that magical method that if I do 1, 2, 3, I end up with a North Star. And the answers I got were very interesting. One answer was, well, you go into a room, and magic happens. And you leave the room and you have it. It's really hard to explain. It just takes years of experience. You can't really teach it. So that's magic. It's very organized and step-by-step example. I continued asking around, because obviously that wasn't the method I was looking for. And next, I got trial and error, which was a little bit better. You go into that room still, but you try something, you have some decision, and you progress with that decision, knowing it's not an ideal decision. You might even feel a little bit bad about it, but it is a decision that you make, and you start making decisions, and you end up with some design, not ideal, and you're probably going to see some redesigns after, but it is a design. Still, not exactly what I was looking for. I'm a very organized person. I need 1, 2, 3. I continued asking around. And then someone told me, you should look at event storming. So checking with ChatGPT, event storming is a fast collaborative technique used to gain a deeper understanding of complex domains, processes, or systems. Or in my words, event storming is a fast method applied by putting dev and business people in a room, and then asking them to describe a business process using domain-driven design until they agree. And the result of such a process is a clear domain modeling with all the relationships between those entities. And since we said Nile is very DDD opinionated, finding a method that comes from DDD sounds quite fitting to our problem. And event storming had a lot of promising things that it was to improve our design process. One is that the process of event storming gives clarity of the domain requirements. And with a better understanding, the team can make more informed decisions during that design. And basically, that helps to reduce the likelihood of those costly rework we were referring to before. Another thing that you get is that it provides alignment and a shared terminology between the business experts and the developers. And that alignment also reduces those misunderstandings or conflicts that sometimes we end up that delay our design or delay even the development part. And last is that the event storming process allows us to validate our design ideas, that model that we came up with, and that helps to uncover potential issues early in the process, before we start development, before it costs us so much. So until now, I gave you a bunch of one-liner definitions, and I gave you some motivation, but I didn't really explain how any of this works. So the TLDR is that you put the right people in the room, you give them a bunch of colorful sticky notes and a marker, and you define the scope and the flows that you're going to be storming that day. You choose a single flow to start from, and you start mapping out that flow with sticky notes on a wall. Still, this is very high level, because I can't continue until I actually explain what type of sticky notes do we use in this session before I actually dive deeper into a real live example. So starting with domain events, because the name is event storming, what we start from are the domain events. Domain events are significant business events or state changes within the domain, and we always phrase them in past tense. And so an example would be invoice paid. When the invoice status changed to paid, we send some event. Another type of useful sticky notes are commands, which are an intent to perform an action or to cause a change in the domain. And that is phrased in present tense. We're commanding something to happen. So, for example, pay invoice is a command. Now, next are aggregates, which is, it is a type of entity, but not all entities are aggregates. It's going to be a bit confusing. Try to bear with me. An aggregate is a group of domain objects consisting of a root entity serving as this primary entry point that enforces strong consistency within that entity. And the reason why you should be really paying attention now is that these aggregates will be really good candidates for your Nile microservice. Because let's take an example. An invoice has invoice line items, has maybe some billing information and some other sub-entities underneath it. But we would not want one of those entities, the sub-entities, to change outside the scope of an invoice. We want consistency on an invoice, and that's why an invoice is an aggregate. So if we map out all the aggregates in our ecosystem, we actually map out all the Nile services we want to generate. Next are external systems. We have a flow, we have a process, and sometimes our domain interacts with other domains. They're not part of our core domain, but they are part of the process, and those we mark with an external system sticker. And for example, if we're talking about an invoice, when I actually want to pay an invoice, I use a payment provider, but that comes from the domain of payments. It's not part of the invoice domain. So I look at that as an external system. Next are policies, which represents business rules, constraints, maybe some validation criteria. And let's take an example. A policy could be that an invoice can't be overpaid. It is a policy, a business policy that is actually an if in the code, but it is a business policy that we need to kind of note that exists. And last are thoughts. Thoughts we use to capture questions, risks, assumptions that we have that are being raised during the discussion, but we don't necessarily want to dive into them, but we do want to capture them. So it allows us to maybe park discussions that we don't want to dive into, to track missing information that maybe we want to take offline to research a bit more, and to mark risks that we have to resolve by the end of this process. And now that we talked about all the different sticky notes that we use, let's take it a bit more down to earth by introducing a real example from Premium. And here you can see the amazing Premium Domains team that were my first attempt facilitating an event storming session. This is actually them in the first day of an event storming session. If there are any one of them here in the crowd, they were very brave. Thank you. Now, Premium Domains allow our users to search, purchase, and manage their domain, DNS records, and SSL certificates. And this team was a really good candidate for event storming because they were just starting their Nile redesign, and they were trying to decide from which part to start it from. And this is the moment that I will apologize for choosing a domain that is called Premium Domains in a lecture about domain-driven design. I know it's a bit confusing, but I really wanted to give you a real example with all the ups and downs that the team had with event storming, and I prefer to stick to the truth than just to take a different domain. So I hope that you'll be forgiving. So first step is we said we need to put the right people in the room. Who are those right people? They need to be business domain experts. It doesn't necessarily mean it could be that it's the oldest developer in the team, if he's the one that knows the business the best, but it can also be product, and it could be someone else outside your team. It needs to be someone who really knows the business domain, and obviously the development team. And in the case of Premium Domains, we decided to put the entire stream. So it was product, UX, QA, writers, Fed, Bed, everyone, because we felt that each of them had some point of view that he could contribute. Next is to choose the scope. You can choose to storm your entire ecosystem. You can choose to storm a single flow. And then once you decide that scope, you need to map the different flows to list them, what flows are included in that scope. In the case for Premium Domains, we wanted to get to the Northstar of the group. So it needs to be domains, SSL, DNS, and all their flows. Like the shortening is search, purchase, and manage, but we had a list of 10, 15 different flows that we needed to cover. Next is the facilitation flavor, let's call it. You can choose to do it flow by flow. You take that list of 10, 15 flows, you take a flow, you map it out, and you move to the next flow. And another type of flavor is to storm the world before you go flow by flow, which is you just start kind of vomiting all the different domain events and then mapping the commands and then kind of understanding what are the aggregates, and then you take the flows and you validate against whatever model you got to. And we decided to go with a more classical approach, which was flow by flow, and we decided to start from the core flow of the domains team, which was the domain purchase flow. Next, up until now, all I said was just the setup. This is where the storming actually starts. So at this point, you ask the entire group of people that is sitting in the room to stand up, to take sticky notes, and to start putting domain events that are part of the process that we are talking about on a wall. And you can actually see the beautiful domain team actually putting sticky notes on a wall, actively participating, and to putting them all on a timeline based on the time that the event actually happens in the process. So if we zoom into what was going on that wall, for example, there can be domain events like subscription created, domain provisioning started, DNS zone file created. And I will say, it doesn't really matter if you understand what SSL is or DNS or domains. It's not really critical for you to understand what we're talking about. It's just an example here that kind of gives a bit of grounding. And this is what we had after we mapped out all the domain events. Next are commands. Commands are also put on that same timeline. So if we take the previous example, we added these 2 commands, provision domain, and create a zone file. And then the outcome of that looked like this. Next are the aggregates, which again, I will remind you, aggregates will be really good candidates for your Nile microservice, so pay attention. In this use case, we have 2 aggregates in this section of the board, which one of them is domain, and the other one is DNS record. Or if you can look at this entire thing, this is what we had after we mapped out all those aggregates. Now let's start introducing the other types of sticky notes that I did put them after the other 3 steps, but it's not necessarily that you need to do it after those 3 steps. You kind of do them interactively as you understand it. Wait, this is not part of my system. Let's mark it with a pink sticker. So for example, we have here 2 external systems, because the domains team, they don't manage subscription domain. It's an external domain for them. They actually interact with the billing system that manages those subscriptions. And we don't really manage DNS records. We use Google Cloud DNS. It's an external provider that we have. So we mapped out all those external systems that we have. And now I want to give you some examples of not all the things that were raised, but some thoughts that we had. So for example, a thought can be, do we need a domain registration request entity separate from the domain, kind of like a draft mode? And I'm not going to dive into the actual discussion that we had, but it was something that was raised, and we parked it at some point because, OK, we were arguing, we couldn't get to a decision, we put it on a note. And last is an example of a policy. As we were discussing the flow, you usually talk about the flow, and then you talk about the negating flow. What happens when I need to cancel something? And then someone said, oh, wait, domains do not get canceled mid-cycle of a subscription, which was like this, what? Why can't them? And apparently because of the business, the way we purchase domains, it makes it more complicated to cancel it mid-cycle. And it's something that it is a policy. It is a business policy of that process. So we put in a note, and we continued on with the discussion. And this is what we had after a full day of storming, which is good, but this is a full day of storming. And we said we had 10, 15 more flows to go. And we didn't really want to spend 10, 15 more days. The point of event storming is it's supposed to speed up your design. It's supposed to be faster, not to take 2, 3 weeks. That's not really what we were going through. So like any good thing at Wix, we want to do a retro. We want to understand what could we have done better. And I'm going to share some of the retro conclusions. One is that we talked about that we have different event storming flavors. And maybe taking the flow-by-flow way wasn't really what we needed, because we were talking about storming the entire system. Maybe we should start by mapping out everything before we go into the specific flows. Maybe that would work better for us. Maybe that would speed things up. So that was one thing that we said, OK, let's try to change that for the next day. Another thing was we had too many people in the room. We wanted to include everyone that had some understanding of the domain, but it was a really big forum. I think we were like 10, 15 people in the room. And in the end, the people that were actually interacting was a small group of, I would say, 5, 6 people that were mainly the backend developer and the product. And that also made it harder to do faster conversation. There were a lot of side conversations. So another thing that we decided was that we need to make it a smaller forum as we continue, because we don't also want to waste so many people's time. So we choose that from the second day, we're only going to minimize it to backend developers and product. Another thing that I noted was that since event storming is coming from domain-driven design, you actually need to understand domain-driven design. You need to understand the concepts, and in order to be able to facilitate a session like this. And I thought I knew. I didn't. And it made it a lot harder to be able to answer questions. We were not sure, wait, is this an aggregate? Is this an entity? Is this a domain event? Is it not? There are so many things that I didn't know how to answer, and it made it harder for me to facilitate it. So I had a task between day 1 and day 2 to kind of learn a lot of things. And there's resources at the end of this presentation of a lot of the things that I learned that helped me understand the domain-driven design a lot better. And last is that we had a lot of discussions, and some of them are good. But some of them were too technical, which is not part of an event storming session. An event storming session is a business discussion. It doesn't talk about, you don't open the code, basically. You're not supposed to open the code, which is something that we actually did in the first day. And those discussions probably also slow down our progress during the day. So second day came, and the decision was we need to manage those discussions. We need to actually park the ones that are not progressing as we're expecting, and we need to learn to cut the ones that are too technical and are not core for our process. And if I look at all of them, I would say that in the end, they all touch on facilitation. And facilitation is really important when you're coming to do an event storming session. And for me, it was the first time I was doing it. So you actually need to prepare better before you actually try to do this, or to maybe bring someone that has done it before to kind of assist you in that first time. So if we take all of these conclusions and apply them from our second day, everything started flowing much better. And this is from our second day. And we also moved to do it online. And this is after we kind of vomited all the domain events in the system. And you can see here the beds and also product kind of just dragging things, trying to group them under things that at that moment we marked them as entities, not aggregates yet. We were just trying to categorize things. And now I am going to speed up 10 hours later, spread over a week of kind of 1-2 hour sessions. And this is what we got. And if I kind of clean it up a little bit, this is actually what we got. And again, I remind you that the yellow stickers are aggregates and the relationship between those aggregates. And each aggregate here is actually going to be, or already is, a Nile service that the Premium Domains team are planning to build. And this is their actual Northstar. And I do know that I lied a little bit. I skipped a big part, because this is only 20 minutes, and I'm probably over time already. But if you're curious what happened in that blob that I kind of jumped, come talk to me after. And I do want to share with you a few of the things that the team told me after I did a retro with them 2-3 months after the original event storming session, to see kind of where do you use this beautiful domain that we got. So one thing that they said was that now it's really clear where we're going. So we can change the scoping and make decisions with more confidence. We have more flexibility in planning. And we wish we did this for previous designs, because being aligned would have saved us a lot of back and forth discussion. And if I kind of sum it up, is they actually got a Northstar. They are more aligned, and it helps them make faster decisions. They have less unknowns. They understand the system really, really good now. So it gives them a lot more confidence as they're making other decisions and progress. And I'm trying to sum this entire super fast talk with 3 things that I hope that you got. One is that you know what event storming is, and that you know when you can use it, and it will be useful for you. And that you're curious to try this method with your team before you go into a really big, complex redesign. And what didn't I show you today? I didn't really show you a sticky note by sticky note example, because only 20 minutes. But there is a list of resources here. One is a great document that's written by someone at Wix, I don't know who, but it's really good about DDD. Another one is a really good book that I highly recommend, and a really good blog post on how to facilitate a session. I have other resources if you're interested to learn more. And please come talk to me if you want to try this out. I'm more than happy to join a session with anyone else that wants to try it out. I hope this was interesting for you, and thank you.